our own government's examination of the footage that they labeled apparent instantaneous acceleration of a UAP.
Regarding the two videos, in particular the last video, there's been a lot of discussion about it online, of course. Where do we take that next? Now, I know that there have been inquiries made to Arrow, to the Department of War. Hey, what can you tell us about this? How were those people received by spokespersons for the Department of War who deal with UAP matters?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two notable responses. I think we can probably show one or two of them here. The one that was most, they basically say the same thing. The one that was most, I think, insightful and thoughtful was Chris Sharp. Chris Sharp, I can show you probably what he wrote to get a response from Susan Go, and what the response was, is essentially, we have nothing for you on this alleged UAP leak or something, whatever it was. And that's what they always say now after that one brief, glorious moment when they admitted this is military film footage of unidentifieds. So Chris Sharp got a great response. I know a lot of other people did too. And it was like basically the same thing. We've got nothing for you on this, which is they're not saying yes or no. They're saying, we're not going to tell you. And the question is about the legitimacy of the video. Like we found out later, people that actually ordered that assessment, because we got some calls. There were some official calls made to people and unofficial. So it was kind of interesting to hear on our end, I think the back, what happened after. What did you notice about the government response? Because if Arrow had this video, which they absolutely had and had access to, why aren't they putting out the good stuff?
No, I mean, first, the statement itself, the two statements that I read that came from the same person, how carefully parsed the language was. Not even acknowledging that she knows what the video is or whether anyone there has seen it until the podcast episode. Being very careful not to give it any credibility at all and not give a hint about whether analysis was done. Is it real? Has any determination been made by Arrow or somebody else that it can be explained? Because as you and I have said many times, if it can be explained, explain it. Cross it off the list. We don't care. We don't have a dog in that fight. We'll share the information. We know the insiders say it's UAP. We slowed it down. We can't figure it out. They're not dummies. The pilots, sensor operators, the analysts who work for these agencies, different intelligence operatives, they're not stupid. If it's a balloon, they should be able to figure that out. If it's birds or some other kind of plane, I did see something interesting on X. People had tried to invoke Grok. Well, let's get Grok to solve this.
Cool.
And Grok was wrong. Grok says something in response to an argument that Merrick was having with somebody on X. Grok says, oh, yeah, well, the white, that indicates it's hot. And then I think Merrick corrected it. No, white means it's cold. Oh, Grok says, oh, yeah, that's right.
Grok has delusions. I'm glad that somebody tried that and publicly went through that. Look, Merrick's been a pit bull on this. First of all, what you're seeing, I'll say it one more time. What you're seeing, our audience, what you're seeing is our own government's examination of the footage that they labeled apparent instantaneous acceleration of a UAP. So this is not just like we got some video and cut it up. That is the official analysis stream that you're seeing. That's why it's in parts. So Merrick has been a real pit bull because he looks at the mental gymnastics and the ridiculous things to try to confuse people, try to confuse the public. So people have really shown their cards. A lot of the debunkers, not the skeptics, the debunkers have shown their cards, because every time they try to get away with some nonsense and hide behind technical jargon or just, some sort of disingenuous statement, immediately I looked at that. He's jumping in and being like, nope, and here's why. Nope, and here's why. And then he'll give you like a video, little explanation visually so you can see why.
A new UAP video released by Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp shows an oddly shaped object much, much colder than its surroundings, appearing to break an infrared lock, maneuver, and then suddenly, instantaneously accelerate to disappear off the screen. Now, UAP debunker Mick West claims that apparent instantaneous acceleration, that rapid zipping off effect, is nothing more than a change in the camera's motion. Unfortunately for West, however, every single statement or claim that he makes to support that assertion is demonstrably, verifiably, blatantly false, and we will demonstrate that in the data and in the video itself. In short, West's entire argument boils down to camera motion that occurred after the object began moving is responsible for the object moving, which of course is nonsensical. After all, an effect cannot precede the cause. Now, thanks to one of our scientist friends, we have extremely precise data that shows exactly what the camera was doing at every single point in the video, and in particular, what occurs when the object begins that apparent instantaneous acceleration, that zipping off motion. Now, West argues that the camera suddenly started panning upwards, and that is what caused the object to appear to accelerate rapidly off the screen. But when we take a closer look, we see that the camera's vertical motion, noted by this red line, only changes dramatically after the object begins its apparent instantaneous acceleration, or that zipping off effect. In other words, the camera's upward motion could not have explained the object beginning its zip off. And we can demonstrate that this vertical motion occurred after the zip off in several different ways. But before we move on, we must, and this is critical, we must highlight that West intentionally conflates these two incidents. He conflates the object beginning its acceleration and the change in the camera's vertical motion, and he claims that they occurred at the same exact moment, when that is clearly false. Every single statement here, which underpins West's theory, is objectively and verifiably false. Now, let's demonstrate visually how the camera's motion changed after the object began its apparent instantaneous acceleration. Here we see the object at the instant, the very moment, down to the frame where it begins its apparent acceleration. You'll notice that the tracking mode is listed on the left as rate. A few frames later, we see the object traveling roughly horizontally across the screen, and the tracking mode is still listed as rate. Just a few frames later, we see that the tracking mode shifts to rate G, and at that precise moment, that precise instant, down to the frame, the object's apparent trajectory shifts downward in a downward diagonal direction, which is precisely what we would expect if the camera's vertical motion changed dramatically. And lo and behold, that is precisely what we see in the data. We see that the camera's vertical motion changes at this exact moment in the video. Now, importantly, this change in vertical motion, which Mick West claims caused the object to appear to accelerate instantaneously, occurred again after the instantaneous acceleration begins. And a slightly different way to illustrate this, if the camera's sudden vertical motion had caused the object to appear to accelerate instantaneously, the object would have proceeded along this downward trajectory from the very beginning. Instead, it proceeds along this horizontal path and then proceeds along that downward trajectory after the camera changed its vertical motion. And this can be demonstrated in yet another way. When we scrub through the footage, we see that there is a lateral component to the background motion as the object begins its instantaneous acceleration. However, when the object passes that point where its trajectory changes, we see that the background motion is straight down, which is exactly what we would expect with vertical camera motion. Just to summarize briefly, West claims that a change in camera motion which occurred after the object began moving is responsible for the object moving, which is an impossibility. Once again, an effect cannot precede a cause. Another element of this footage that is perplexing and frankly intriguing is the object appearing to break the infrared sensor lock and maneuver off to the left here, despite lacking wings, control surfaces, or any conventional means of propulsion. And it's particularly interesting because the object appears to break the lock while the background motion is constant. That suggests, and the data show this, that suggests that there is no change in camera motion, which is very, very interesting. And last but certainly not least, the object's infrared signature is truly bizarre and truly perplexing. The object is much, much colder than its surroundings. It's uniformly cold, and it's entirely inconsistent with all of the empirical evidence that we have of balloons in infrared. Of course, Mick West claims that this is a balloon, but if he has any evidence at all, any empirical evidence of balloons in infrared that look anything remotely like this object, he must present it. And finally, it must be reiterated that Mick West resorted to demonstrably, verifiably, blatantly false statements and claims to make his so-called case. There is nothing objective nor scientific about such an approach.
The number one thing people should look at is why it's not camera movement. Changing of lenses, like in the Tic Tac thing, in the earlier part. You can see the ground continuing to move in one direction when the object literally appears to shoot off. And that instantaneous motion, you can see the ground continue moving. And then in this one, the operator pans out, I think about 4 times, and then goes to the right because that's where they saw it go off. It's just so blatantly obvious with the human eye, but then Merrick goes in there, doesn't let him get away with anything, and tells the truth. And that's been so cool to see.